Today we are going to make a rhubarb bar. With the summer and rhubarb's almost at the end of being able to use that, but I was able to secure some rhubarb from a friend of mine. So we are going to make a rhubarb bar, which can actually be also used as a dessert with a little topping, which I'll show you a little bit later. So it's a really easy recipe. I have the oven on at 350 degrees preheated. And we're going to start with adding, I'm using the food processor, and we're going to put in 2 cups of flour. And it's already pre-sifted, so you don't have to sift it. And they're a little bit sweet, so 2 cups of brown sugar. If you don't want it quite as sweet, you can put in a little bit less. And 1.5 cups of oatmeal. And what I like to do sometimes with using the food processor is just mix it a little bit before you add the butter. So I'm just going to turn it on for just a couple of minutes. Just gets the dry ingredients mixed in a little bit. And it actually calls for 2 sticks of melted butter, but I like to make it like a pie crust, and it's going to be crumbly. So I'm just going to cut in 2 sticks of butter. And I've had the butter sitting out for, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, so it doesn't have to be totally hard. But when you're adding it to this mixture, you don't want it too soft either, because then the mixture, instead of just getting crumbly, it's going to be a little bit too soft, and your crust is going to turn out a little bit different than what you want. And then we're going to pulse this until it's a crumbly mixture. And then you can check it partway through. I used to always make my crusts by hand, all of these crumb crusts with flour, sugar, brown sugar, oatmeal, and then when I got my food processor, I thought, wow, this is really easy, because you have to mix it. If you're doing it by hand, you're mixing in the butter until you get that crumb mixture just the way you want it, and this is so much easier. So I really like using my food processor. Okay, so I already have a pan greased, so we're using a 9x13 pan, and I actually have doubled this recipe. So the recipe that I'm using was for a 9-inch pan. So if you don't want, if you can't use a 9x13, then just use half of the recipe, and then you'd use a 9-inch square pan. So just dump in about half of the mixture. Half is going to go on the bottom, and then the other half will be for the top. And if there's some of the butter is still a little bit, chunky, that's fine. And then we're just going to smooth that down. And just so it's all flattened. And you can use, a Pyrex pan. I sometimes use my Longaberger pottery pan, so you don't have to just use the aluminum pan. And this recipe does call for your pan being greased, whereas a lot of recipes that have this type of mixture will just have you put your crust in the pan. So either way is probably fine. And what I like to do with my rhubarb, sometimes you end up having more rhubarb than what you can use up right away. So I freeze it. So I'm actually using 4 cups of rhubarb that I got out of the freezer this morning. And when you're using frozen, rhubarb or blueberries or apples, you don't want to thaw it. So they've been sitting out for a little while. But I just put it in frozen. And otherwise it can end up making your recipe kind of soupy because of the extra moisture that's going to come out of the fruit if you thaw it first. So I just took it out of the freezer, and I had any frost that might have built up, I just had it in my colander, so that can drain out. And then just put this in your pan. Actually, before I finish this, I'm going to put 2 tablespoons of butter in the microwave to melt. This recipe calls for 4 cups of rhubarb. And if you like a lot of rhubarb with most recipes, you can be generous and add even a little bit more than that. I'll put the rest of this in. So we've got that all spread out nicely. Let me see if my butter is melted. Okay. So for the middle topping, we're going to top this with sugar, 1.5 cups of sugar, 3 tablespoons of flour, half a teaspoon of nutmeg, and I'm going to stir that around to mix before we add the wet ingredients. And we're going to add 2 tablespoons of butter and 2 beaten eggs. And you can just beat the eggs with your fork. Growing up, my mother would make a lot of rhubarb desserts because we had an orchard and had a lot of fruit plants and had rhubarb beds, and so she would freeze a lot. And many of the desserts that we would have, whether it was cherries or rhubarb or blueberries, she would make a homemade white cake. I personally prefer the oatmeal type flour, brown sugar, oatmeal butter myself, but feeding a large farm family, she would just do a simple white cake from scratch. And in one meal, that was always gone. And I had one brother in particular that was a rather slow eater, so he used to complain that the dessert was typically gone before he got to it because he ate the rest of his meal slowly. Okay, so we've got everything in here, so we're just going to pour this on top. Try to even it out if you can as you're pouring, and then you can then use a knife then to get the rest of it even. We have an event tonight at our parish, so I thought, and I volunteered to make the dessert, so I thought this would be a nice summer dessert to make. Use your scraper and just get it all out of your dish or your container. I actually purchased some measuring cups from Pampered Chef, and they're like an acrylic cup, and they have all of the measurements on the side, and it just makes it a lot easier sometimes if you don't need a large bowl. Starting it with just using your measuring cup works. When I bake or cook, I try to, utilize whatever containers I'm using. For example, if I've sometimes have melted some butter and you're going to be putting your eggs, in the same mixture, and it doesn't really matter whether you have a clean bowl, or very often if I'm making buttermilk. For a lot of my recipes now, instead of buying buttermilk, because I'm not always sure when I'm going to need it, so I make it by just adding some lemon juice or vinegar. So then you can also use the same bowl that you used by just emptying out one of your items, and then use it then, so you're not, especially if you're washing dishes by hand. A lot of times we're going to put our dishes in the dishwasher when we're all done, but if you have to wash everything by hand, the dishes really mount up, especially with some of these things like this, where you've got a lot of different ingredients and a lot of different dishes that you're going to have to use. Okay, so that's pretty good. Finish that off, and then we're going to top it with the rest of the other half of the oatmeal mixture. So then just try to even that out, and then you're just going to press it down lightly. You don't have to have it down too hard. for 20 to 25 minutes. And like I've said before, I'll typically start something in the oven at the shorter length of time. So then if it needs more time, you can always add a little bit more. Depending on how your oven bakes, some ovens bake hotter and faster. So if you put it in the full amount of time, then you might end up having your item bake longer than what's necessary, and sometimes a cause for them to burn. So this is the finished product. So we are going to put that in the oven, and we're going to start it at 20 minutes at 350 degrees. When it's done baking, it's going to look like that. And then you can just take, any kind of sharp knife. And like I said, these are called rhubarb bars. I'm going to go around the edges first. But you could also, either cut them into a small piece if you're having several types of dessert, or if you're going to add some extra fruit or something, or cut them into a larger piece if you want that to be your main dessert. So I'm just going to cut them into about a 2 by 2 or 2 by 3. It looks like they're going to be a little bit juicy, and that's okay. Have a square piece like that. And you can either eat it just like that, or you can top it with a little bit of whipped cream, which I'm going to do. Just happen to have some whipped cream made from something else I made yesterday. So if you want to be fancy, you can use a piping bag if you happen to have a piping bag, or you can just put a dollop of whipped cream on your dessert and you're all set to go. So for a nice summery dessert using rhubarb, either you maybe have a garden yourself, or you have some friends that can give you some rhubarb, and it comes in really handy, and it's a great dessert for the summer. So from A Slice of Heaven, until next time, happy cooking. So Gary has a project he's working on today, which is trying to put together an antenna to put on. It's actually going to go in the attic. So we're going to take this out to him and see how he's doing. He counted 57 pieces for this antenna, so hopefully he finds all the right places for all the pieces. So here we go. We're going to surprise him with this. So how is this antenna coming along?
Oh, I'll tell you what.
And here is our rhubarb dessert.
Well, thank you.
And you're welcome.
Thank you. The antenna's fine, as long as I can get it together.
So how many pieces do you think you've gotten together so far?
In total, there's probably about 48 pieces
altogether. Okay,
yeah.
So I thought you counted 57.
Well, I was counting these other pieces that don't.
Oh, I see.
Counted,
Okay.
So, yeah.
And I see you had to go into your toolbox to get a few other pieces.
One of my 7 junk buckets, I did find the right parts that I needed to finish it, because you know how it is, they're always missing a few parts.
Yeah.
But no, this
so
is
what do
all
you think? Is it like Mom used to make?
It's perfect. It's just like Mom used to make. I knew I married the right
woman.
Cool. Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll have an antenna that works by the end of our day.